Nasser obviously is in a dire situation right now. What have you been hearing about the situation on the ground? And is it fair to say that Nasser is really the only hospital left standing in Gaza, if and it's barely standing at that per reports?
Nasser is now destroyed. There's no definition, I think, by which we can say that Nasser is a functioning hospital. The Israelis had cut off all materiel to the hospital. There were convoys, only a couple of which had succeeded in bringing in any supplies at all. The latest convoy that finally managed to get in was a WHO convoy to evacuate patients. And what they said they saw was some of the worst conditions that are imaginable. The patients, there are approximately 200 patients there just awaiting their fate, being cared for by 5 doctors. These are the sickest patients, patients that usually have a ratio of 1 to 1 or 2 to 1. And so these are very sick patients. Already, at least 8 that we know of have died, were cut off from communication. So the number is likely already higher. They've died because of a lack of electricity, they've died because of a lack of food. The Israelis are not allowing the medical teams to freely travel in and out of the hospital to provide care, and they are not providing care themselves, instead, shooting at some of the providers and shooting at some of the patients.
Can you speak about some of your colleagues that have been shot, have been killed, and then also, of course, the news over the past few days that Dr. Khalid al-Sur has been missing for many days at this point and is presumed abducted by Israeli forces?
Yeah, Khalid Assur, the best case scenario for Dr. Khalid is that he has been detained, arrested, and is being tortured. That is the best case scenario right now. And that is appalling. That is appalling. Absolutely unacceptable. So I think the way that we have to really look at this is that the Israelis, in committing these war crimes, are really setting a new definition for what's acceptable in war. If we as an international community allow these attacks on hospitals and on medical personnel, then what we are doing is we are setting in motion the possibility for other countries to do the same thing. We're creating new norms of war, and we absolutely have to fight that tooth and nail. Dr. Khalid, we know him. He's one of many doctors there, but we know him because he's been particularly active in terms of social media. And so Dr. Khalid has been relaying minute to minute and day to day exactly what he's going through. However, the news that we haven't received, so many of my colleagues have been abducted. I'm in emergency medicine, and so we tend to be the last doctors out of the building. And so some of them, including a student of mine, have been arrested. When people have gotten word out about what's going on, it has been things that one can barely imagine. For example, the head of Shifa, Dr. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, was made to walk on his hands and feet like a dog on a leash to eat food from the ground while naked in front of other prisoners. These are the reports that are coming out, and it's terrifying. It's terrifying, and unfortunately, it's credible. It's credible because these are not the first reports. These reports have been coming out for, again, years and decades. Even the United Nations has found significant amounts of sexual abuse of prisoners, including women, in the jails. So I'm very worried about the patients who are there in Nasser. I'm deeply concerned about the patients who are there. The patients will die. These are the sickest patients. Otherwise, they would have been extracted by their families, would have left under their own steam if they could. They are being cared for by too few doctors, and those doctors are themselves at deep risk. They've seen their colleagues go missing. Many of them have been arrested. We've seen photos from another hospital just up the street, Al Amal Hospital, in which the same thing has happened. It simply cannot be allowed to pass. We cannot allow the Israelis to set a new standard for this kind of depraved warfare while we all just sit there and watch.
Is it in your opinion medically? I understand that this is an international law term, but is it your opinion that a genocide is underway?
Yeah, absolutely. These are not words that we take we take lightly. It's not a word I've ever used before. However, in this war, at a certain point, we had to conclude that indeed it's a genocide. We had to agree with the historians. Before that, maybe there was some disagreement because of the pace of the genocide. Maybe there was some disagreement because the intent of the Israelis was, only so clear. I think it was always relatively clear they wanted a genocide, but it wasn't always clear that they were enacting a genocide. However, over the last few months, there is simply no doubt. Scholars, I'm not a genocide scholar, so I look to genocide scholars, and they all say that this is a case of textbook genocide. Israeli scholars, Palestinian scholars, international scholars. It's not really limited. Anybody with any iota of decency and looking at the history and looking at what genocide means has declared this a genocide. And now we're in the process of getting it declared at the highest level. The International Court of Justice will find this a genocide. Unless they are completely morally bankrupt, they will find this a genocide. But after what? We can't wait 4 years when patients like in Nasr are dying today, when doctors are being abducted today. And it's not like we have no power over this. The United States can end this today. They truly can. The EU might take a little bit longer, but also has significant things that they can bring to bear. And my country, Canada, also is able to make a difference. These countries aren't just supporting genocide quietly. They're supporting genocide actively. They are blocking international institutions that will hold Israel accountable, such as the United Nations Security Council, which is literally being vetoed by the states. They are stopping accountability at almost every level while also continuing the suppression of Palestinians, like protests here in which we're trying to support Palestinians are being actively policed, actively suppressed. I have charges because there's an allegation that I sprayed ketchup on a member of parliament's office to protest the genocide. Why? Why are there criminal charges for that? So, and we're seeing that that's again a microcosm of what's happening to many people all across the world, where protest is being criminalized and we're asking for Palestinian dignity and human rights is being criminalized.
What does genocide look like medically? What are the images that you see that you want people to understand that it looks like in practice from a doctor's perspective?
Genocide is absolutely gruesome. And we've seen it in the history books. We are making history now. And that's why what we're seeing looks like it's from the history books. Our teams that are on the ground in Gaza right now, and by the way, I'm not allowed to go. I got arrested and deported when I was trying to go to Gaza because the authorities knew I was trying to go and help. Only that. So the teams that have arrived there, they measure, for example, extreme malnutrition using a kind of tape that UNICEF issues called the MUAC tape. This tape is no longer sufficient. Nobody is out of the severe malnutrition category. And so it makes it difficult for us to discriminate. Genocide looks like children dying of malnutrition. Every doctor who is in a hospital is seeing people come in with wounds that are fatal, that would be fatal anywhere. Genocide looks like people being killed outright. They're also seeing patients with wounds that should not kill them. I'm seeing photos, I'm being consulted on patients by my colleagues, and our teams are treating patients with wounds that should never kill them, wounds that could easily be cleaned. Genocide looks like patients who should never die, who should be easily treated, who are being treated. Yesterday, actually in the morning hours, the dean of nursing was assassinated. One of the deans of nursing of the biggest schools in Gaza was assassinated. The entire layer of leadership of the medical institution, the deans of the medical school have been assassinated. The head of Shifa, my very close friend, Dr. Hani al-Haytham, was assassinated along with his wife, also a doctor, and their 5 children. So we see the entire leadership being killed. The medical system is being destroyed thoroughly, not just for today, but for years and generations to come. Genocide looks like destroying the future of Palestinians. And the last thing that we can say is that the Israelis have destroyed or severely damaged almost every piece of cultural, educational, governmental, civil society infrastructure that there is. The music theater, the symphony hall is not Hamas. The sewage system is not Hamas. These things are not Hamas. The hospitals are not Hamas. They are being destroyed. Genocide looks like removing everything that makes up an ingredient of civil society. So it really covers the entire gamut, all the way from the top to the bottom of what makes life possible and what makes life civilized. And that's what we're seeing in this genocide.
You had been working at Al Shifa Hospital, is what you said. I just want to make sure I get that right. Yes.
Yeah.
One of the places that the Israeli military had accused of being a Hamas command center as a pretext for attacking it. In your experience there, can you speak to those claims that have not been provided, that no real evidence has been provided for?
Yeah, the claims are lies. That's obvious. Israel had its way with Shifa for 2 weeks at least, and we're not able to give any evidence at all. In Nasser, it's the exact same thing. The Israelis are lying. On Anarwa, the Israelis are lying. When they hit Ahli, the Israelis were lying. The issue here is that the Israelis are pathological liars when it comes to these accusations of Palestinians. The Palestinians did not use their hospitals for any kind of military activity. I can tell you, obviously Palestinian society is rich and heterogeneous. And so if you were to go into the hospital and do anything that resembled military activity, doctors like me would protest it, would fight it. We would spot it. You can't hide anything in a place like Shifa Hospital. Shifa is packed. There was never one place that I couldn't go to, never one place that I didn't go to. I went all over the hospital because I loved exploring it. I loved seeing what was in the different places and talking to the people who were there. These experiences that unfortunately can't be repeated now if we were to go to Shifa today because so much of it has been destroyed. There is no way that there was military activity in Shifa. I've never seen it. And I've been working there for, as you mentioned, over a decade. I'm one of the people as far as they're concerned. They would trust me. And I can tell you that if there was anything like that, I would have picked it up. And so would the other Palestinians, half of whom hate Hamas. They're not interested in being some kind of decoy or giving any cover to Hamas. I mean, half of the people in Gaza are Fatah, are supporters of Fatah. Half of them, let's say, are supporters of Hamas. And so there's no way that you could hide something like that. It didn't happen. The Israelis have such a rich history of lying. They've been caught red-handed multiple times, planting evidence that they claim is real, like a calendar literally pointing at a baby bottle and saying that the baby bottle represents Hamas. It's nonsense. In Nasser, they're doing the exact same thing. We know they're lies. The problem here is that we as an international community are allowing the Israelis to desecrate a hospital, to kill patients in it, and to basically destroy an important health institution just on the basis of what we all know are lies. For example, in another hospital, similar sounding name, Nasser, there were babies in incubators, literally, who were lying there. The medical staff were told that they would be cared for by the Israelis, and they were evacuated. They were not allowed to take the patients with them. When finally, 17 days later, people were allowed to go back in, those same patients, I say patients, but babies, premature babies, were found rotting in their spots where they couldn't receive any care, where they died cold and alone.
Unspeakable. Can you talk a little bit more about, apologies. Can you talk a bit more about the nature of Gaza and how Israel controls its borders, land and sea, and how that hamstrings medical personnel in their ability to provide care.
Why am I not in Gaza right now? I am an emergency doctor. I am trained in battlefield trauma. I've been working in this place for a long, long time, and I've worked in several other countries. I am not there because of a Israeli-led international blockade. All of those words are important. It is an Israeli blockade, but it is also an international blockade. There is a sea border. There is an Egyptian border. The Israelis have dominated every aspect of Palestinian life for decades. For decades. It is what one thinker, Jeffrey Halper, calls the matrix of control. And so, of course, there's a blockade. It is like the Israelis are obsessed with controlling Palestinian lives and Palestinian bodies. Dov Weisglass, one of the advisors to the Israeli government, put Gaza on what he called the Gaza diet. This was I think it was in 2007, I forget the exact time. He said, we don't think that the world will allow us to starve the Palestinian people, so we're going to put them on a diet. He called it the Gaza diet. I think it worked out to 2,100 calories per person allowed in, which of course means significantly less than that. There was malnutrition before this war. There were kids dying of preventable diseases before this war. I wasn't traveling to Gaza because everything was fine. I was traveling to Gaza because nothing was fine. And the Israelis controlled my entry. They would strip search me. They would humiliate me. They would arrest and deport me. I've been arrested by the Israelis probably a half dozen times at this point. They would abuse me. They would interrogate me. The best case scenario, a trip where I would thank my lucky stars for how easy it was, involved me being naked in a room for 2 hours, interrogated for another 2 to 3 hours, making my way over to Erez and being treated like cattle as I went through metal turnstiles, again being searched and interrogated. So, and by the way, that distance between Gaza and Tel Aviv is 60 kilometers. What's that, 40 miles? Yeah. You know, it should not take 10, 12, 14 hours to make that journey. Sometimes it would take me, I would arrive and then they would say, no, you're not allowed in today. And that was it. Sometimes I'd try to exit and they would say the same thing. That's me, a Canadian. They have to treat me as though I'm white. They have to treat me differently from the Palestinians. The Palestinians got the worst treatment imaginable. Think of what's happening right now in Nasser and how they're being treated. Now, project that out into every other domain. So, for example, 75% of patients were denied medical treatment outside of Gaza, according to the WHO reports. The other 25%, in case you think they had it easy, had delays of on average 6 months before they received approval. Imagine, I'm trying to think, if my mother had cancer and somebody told her, you're going to have to wait 6 months, best case scenario, so that you can go access treatment outside. It's a death sentence. It's a death sentence. It was a death sentence to hundreds of Palestinians every year, hundreds of them. And on the southern border, of course, Egypt is complicit. However, they're a junior partner. They're not the senior partner in this. The senior partners are Israel and the United States. Money was hard to get in. Fuel was hard to get in. Food was hard to get in. Medical supplies were often banned. In fact, one of the projects I work on was to create medical devices inside Gaza. Why would we do that? Why would we go through all that trouble? I mean, yes, sure, it's nice to 3D print some tourniquets, but if we could have, we would have bought them en masse. If we could have, we would have imported them like everywhere else in the world. The blockade was so thorough and so overbearing and so imposing that it affected every iota of life for over a decade in Gaza. It destroyed so many lives. It led to terrible unemployment, terrible malnutrition, terrible mental health. It led to the invention of a new term, chronic traumatic stress disorder. We used to always think, when I was studying, we studied post-traumatic stress disorder. Palestinians had to entertain the question, what if there is no post? What if the trauma never ends?